I am not so sure that our sector has passed that morality test here, because during the genocide, which is still ongoing, many of us did not speak up on it. We were afraid, and those who did speak up oftentimes got punished for it. One piece of advice is maybe check your assumptions. The assumption is that if you do speak up, you will lose donors, you will offend people, and maybe
you'll lose your tax-exempt status. I've talked to organizations that are scared of that.
Exactly. Well, let's check these assumptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
The assumption that you may offend some donors, yeah, that may happen. But who's to say that you won't get more donors who come in because you are aligned with your priorities?
You're listening to the Nonprofit Counsel podcast with host May Harris.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Counsel podcast. My name is May Harris, and today I am joined by Vu Le, a wonderful, prolific advocate for the nonprofit sector. And I am so excited to have you, Vu, on the Nonprofit Counsel podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, May. Thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, my pleasure. So you have been very clear recently about that you believe democracy is under attack and fascism is on the rise. So why do you believe it's important for nonprofits right now to name this directly?
Yeah, well, I mean, our sector's directive, right, is to create a just and equitable world. We cannot do that when we are facing this sort of threat that is taking over everything, destroying DEI, terrorizing communities, just doing awful things that are very counter to what our sector is trying to do.
Right. You've written about this quite a bit on your amazing blog, Nonprofits AF, I believe. Did I get that right? Nonprofitsaf.com?
Nonprofit AF. Mm-hmm.
Nonprofit AF, not Nonprofits AF. And so where do you think that the idea came that nonprofits should be apolitical? Because that's really what I think most nonprofits believe they should be.
I think it comes from this sort of white moderate tendency that has been built into our sector. White moderation is the concept that Dr. King warned us was the biggest threat to justice. It was not people burning crosses and wearing hoods. It's like the very nice people who are on the side saying we should be more civil to one another. You know, we agree about equity and justice, but let's prioritize getting along with one another. Let's prioritize not ruffling feathers. And over the decades, we've entrenched this philosophy into our work. So now we prioritize more about just getting along with one another, not creating tension, and creating this, I think what Dr. King called a negative peace, which is like a peace from lack of tension and not necessarily a peace from the presence of justice.
Right. So just being comfortable with the status quo, really.
Yeah, that's another thing too. Many of us have to acknowledge that our livelihoods depend on the existence of inequity so that we can get paid to
that we're comfortable with. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But I think your point is that really disproportionately impacts marginalized or communities and communities of color, correct?
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, looking at what's been happening throughout history and currently right now with what's happening with ICE in Minnesota, everywhere, it's always going to be communities of color, trans people, disabled people, LGBTQIA folks who will be disproportionately affected by everything that's been going on.
So you're of the position, I share this, that nonprofits, the charities, the boots on the ground need to be a lot more vocal, a lot more engaged in what's going on. What kind of steps do you think they could take to do that if they're not used to it, if they're used to the status quo?
Yeah, they definitely do need to be more vocal. I feel like this is a moral compass for our sector. We've had many moral compass. I feel like Palestine was definitely one of the biggest ones, and I am not so sure that our sector has passed that morality test here, because during the genocide, which is still ongoing, many of us did not speak up on it. We were afraid, and those who did speak up oftentimes got punished for it. What advice would I give for people who are for nonprofits to think about? I feel like maybe one piece of advice is maybe check your assumptions. The assumption is that if you do speak up, you will lose donors, you will offend people, and maybe some
You'll
of these
lose
assumptions.
your tax-exempt status. I've talked to organizations that are scared of that.
Exactly. Well, let's check these assumptions, right?
Mhm.
The assumption that you may offend some donors, yeah, that may happen, but there, but who's to say that you won't get more donors who come in because you are aligned with your priorities? In my book, I talk about an organization that was supporting Black Lives Matter base when it was very controversial back then to support it, and they send out an email blast to all of their donors, several thousand donors, and saying we support Black Lives Matter, we support defunding the police, and they did get some donors drop out, but for every donor who dropped out, they got like five donors who came in because they were sticking up with their values. The other assumption that you mentioned is you could lose your 501c3 status, right? And the assumption is, well, if you lose your 501c3 status, then that's awful. You can't do anything and you're just helpless. Well,
That's
is
not
that
true
really
either.
true? Because
No,
yeah, you can still do stuff, and a lot of good work gets done by movements, by mutual assistance
Mhm.
associations, by individuals, by religious organizations, even by
Mhm.
LLCs. So you don't need to have a 501c3. So stop letting that be like the sort of Damocles hang over your head, you know?
That's a perfect way to say it. It's just this unrealistic fear that's hanging over your head. And I think you really mentioned something that really resonated with me. Nonprofit organizations need to be authentic. They can't be constantly changing or pivoting based on the weather or the administration. So if those kinds of Black Lives Matter matters to you, DEI issues matter, be authentic to who you are as an organization. I think that's critical. So you can't always run scared.
Right. We can't be too, I don't know, too reactive to things, because
Hmm.
the reality is that this is not the first time we've had like a backlash against the things that we're trying to do. I can imagine like the leaders in the civil rights movements, just like fighting endless battles here.
Hmm.
And so, no, this is not new. These
No.
authoritarian fascist attacks are not new. So we need to remain steady and committed to our principles.
Well, and the response from the communities isn't new either. I mean, protests are not new, but sometimes they need to happen in a democracy like ours. So, what does it look like from a funding perspective? I've read a few of your articles on, really saying that funders and private foundations need to step in to be authentic and to be strategic and to support these kinds of initiatives. So, what would you add in? We've talked about charities and the boots on the ground, but what about the organizations that support and that those organizations rely upon? I think they have just as big of a piece to play in this.
They have a very important role to play. But let's disaggregate when we talk about foundations or
Hmm.
institutional funders, right? We kind of lump them all together. But the reality is that there are progressive leaning funders and then there are conservative leaning funders. And the conservative leaning funders have been way more effective than the progressive leaning ones. And
Really,
it's
how so?
because,
So, yeah.
well, yeah, they've been when they are strategic, they're talking about like, this is like a 50-year plan that we're going to implement, right? And they fund their grantees for 20 or 30 years at a time. And it's general operating funds. On the progressive side, we tend to fund isolated things. We avoid
Mm.
politics. We fund 1 year at a time, highly restricted grant dollars, very limited grant dollars. Whereas on the right, if we look at organizations such as Turning Point USA, for example, which is trying to get college students and high school students to be right wing. And, I think 1 year, 2021, maybe they raised, I think, almost $60 million. And I can't imagine these right-wing funders going to them and saying, well, we'll give you $5,000, and you can only spend it on paper clips because we don't want to spend on overhead. No, they're like, here's several $1 million for the next 20 years. Just keep doing what you're doing. As long as we see results, we're going to keep funding you.
So, why do you think that progressive or left-leaning funders aren't doing the same?
I think in many ways they are bought into the status quo being the way it is. If we
Hmm.
actually get everything that we want, if progressives get our goals met, we would not have foundations. We wouldn't have
Mm.
billionaires. We wouldn't have so much wealth inequity that rich people are able to avoid paying taxes and then hoard all this money and then get to pick and choose the causes that they care about based on their
Mhm.
whims and passions, right? And
So the
so what
20-year funding might be antithetical to their foundational belief.
exactly it poses an existential threat to them, and
Interesting.
they haven't really examined it.
So what would you say to those funders to try to get them to switch their perspective?
I would say, like, right now, everything is under threat because of fascism, and like, if they're only concerned about their self interests, then this is also a threat to them because under an authoritarian regime, like they're not going to care for these foundations. They might get all their assets seized. So what exactly are they saving up all this money for preserving a system?
Hmm.
Because they are going to be under threat as well. This is probably a lesson that is very vital for all of us to understand. Because right now, like, trans people are getting attacked, immigrants, refugees have been attacked, and I hear from people like, "Well, I don't know. I'm an immigrant. Why would I care about this? How does this affect me?" Well, now U.S. immigrants are getting murdered and executed in public as well by the U.S. government, right? And your passport is not going to protect you because they could just confiscate that and say that you use a forgery. And how are you going to prove that you didn't?
So
So what? Yeah.
yeah, so I think you're really advocating for a paradigm shift in philanthropy, really, from a thought that this is charity, small support, small year support, restricted support, to really solidarity with the movements that they need to espouse. It's a
Yes.
paradigm shift.
Absolutely, and for their own best interests as well. I mean, when Hitler came into power, in like 1939 or whatever, he did very similar tactics of like destroying the civil sector, like getting like attacking nonprofits. Like these are tactics that we've seen repeated throughout history here. So the funders, if they were wise, they would kind of study these patterns because like they're getting attacked too, but they have not been playing very strategic in terms of like countering that.
So, do you see any room in this paradigm shift to working together or communicating and coming together? Or do you not see that in the cards for our sector?
We have to come together. I mean, look at what's been happening in Minnesota. Like, it's all
Hmm.
of these organizations, businesses, getting together, individuals, like communities, neighbors getting. It's very inspiring how people in Minnesota have been resisting ICE and
Hmm.
and demonstrating and it's working. So we have no choice but to work together now. But in order for
Hmm.
that to happen, then these funders really have to understand like what the mistakes that they've made in the past. For example, not supporting political work. Like the right does, they support several key things. They support building institutions. So they have like really strong institutions such as the Heritage Foundation. They
Hmm.
support their cultural warriors. So we can name a dozen, cultural, like, conservative voices immediately right now, right? We don't have the same on the left. They control the media narrative. So like Fox News, Sinclair Network, ONN, all of these, all various podcasts and et cetera. Like they control that, and that allows them to control the cultural narrative. They also elect political leaders and across every single level, and they really shape the judiciary. Like they spend billions of dollars to get as many right-wing justices onto the Supreme Court as possible. And
Hmm.
they've been doing this for decades now. And the left has no strategy to counter that in anywhere near the same level. So if these funders are like, well, we need them to be partners, then they have to understand that. But instead, they're out there oftentimes they're doing what I call toxic intellectualizing, where they just love having meetings and conversations, and at the end they'll maybe increase,
Intellectual
yeah,
conversation.
toxic intellectualizing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of meant, we've in our society, we've got the right and the left that seems to be moving farther and farther apart, which, house divided cannot stand. Do you see any possibility of us all, the sector, the nonprofit sector, working together to advance the well-being of the country? Or are we just always going to be dividing?
We can definitely try. I mean, right now I'm seeing a lot of Trump supporters regretting their votes, being affected by all these different policies, going bankrupt, having their health care removed, having their loved ones deported, and so on. And now they're like, "Well, I didn't vote for this," and what everyone else like, "Yeah, you did. This is exactly what you voted for." So getting them to understand that is going to be vital, right? So I'm seeing signs of hope of them starting to like kind of change, but that is going to be hard to do if our side does not counter with the same sort of media narratives and so on. Like the
Hmm.
conservative movements, I hear the right-wing movements put out 5 times more content on social media than the progressives, right? And then they
Interesting.
have organizations like Turning Point USA. And so if we don't counter that, then yeah, we're going to be divided because people only hear it's like climate change. I think climate change is a really good example of what could happen when we don't counter the narrative. And not only that, but we also kind of like fall prey to this both siding narrative of like, oh,
Hmm.
both sides are valid. No, both sides are not valid. Okay, so we need to stop it. So a lot of us on the left side just become more and more centrist, while the right becomes more and more authoritarian and
Hmm.
fascist. And so getting them to move into the middle, it's going to take some work and some recognition that the left has been yielding ground and thinking that meeting in the middle is like a good thing when oftentimes it's not.
Very interesting. So I think you're really advocating for responsible bravery when it comes to nonprofits and their role in leading this. So what does that look like to you?
It looks like I don't know, like being out there, being outspoken, taking risks when you can, listening to the voices of communities. Oftentimes, a lot of funders or a lot of even nonprofits, we become very entrenched in our own echo chamber, and we're like, well, this is what we think is best for the community. These are the strategies we think will be effective, and we don't check in with community members who are like, no, that's actually a really terrible strategy. What we need
Hmm.
right now is for you to do this, this, and this. And so we need to be brave in acting out foundation and listening to communities and following through and taking risks.
Hmm.
A lot of the foundations, they are very risk averse. They have general counsels who are lawyers telling them like, these are the things you need to avoid. These are the liabilities. You need to avoid them. Don't take
As a
any
lawyer, I
risks.
can say, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
They have that going on. I really think, one thing that nonprofits could do that they're not used to doing is working together in consortiums instead of competing. There's something baked into the sector that, oh no, we can't work together. Oh no, we're competing for the same donor dollars. We're competing for the same support. Where really, if organizations of like mind that you're talking about could really work together in cooperation and collaboration instead of competition, I think that would actually do a great deal of service in the sector.
I agree. I agree. And a couple of points I would bring up. One is that it's not always the nonprofit's fault for not working together, right? We
True,
look at
true. We baked it into them.
yeah, we
We
bake it
really have.
right into the sector of foundations, like creating these cutthroat competitive processes, also perpetuating the illusion of scarcity. They're like, oh,
Right.
we only give out so much, we only have so much money to give out. Well, it's because they only give out 5%, right?
If
So they'll
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So they're
A
like not
minimum,
even that.
minimum. Yeah,
Yeah, because a lot of times they give money to a donor advice fund, and that
that's right.
counts towards 5%. And of course, all their operations, their CEO salary, their staff salaries, their rent, all counts towards that 5%. So they're not actually giving out 5%. right? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking like, what are you saving all this money for? Like you're saving for a rainy day when there is a monsoon right now, and the competitiveness is baked in. But then we also perpetuate it ourselves with the way that we fundraise, for example,
Mm-hmm.
um, where it's always about like making sure that donors thanking them the fastest, and instead of making sure that they feel like heroes and so on. All these things that create like this competitiveness there. And so I think we really need to get out of this like nonprofit Hunger Games we've been playing with one another.
Well, that reminded me when I first started reading your blog and seeing your work, it was about negative funders or something along the lines of like crappy funding practices or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I thought that was fantastic because, you were bringing to the forefront something that everyone talked about in the sector, but no one had the guts to actually say anything about it. And I love that. Are you still doing that?
There is a group that is doing that. It's a movement called Crappy Funding
Funding
Practices.
practices. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's mostly on LinkedIn. So there is a form that you can fill out, and you will remain anonymous, and you can report a funder, and then the team will do some due diligence, and if it makes sense, they will call out this funder by name on LinkedIn.
Right.
And like that is a strategy that we need to start thinking about, because asking nicely for funders to
Mhm.
change has not been working. So we might need to use different tools, including, public shaming.
That one might be a good one for exactly what we're talking about. Because I mean, some of the most egregious examples are, applications that to just do the work wasn't even worth the $1,000 that they were going to grant or anything like that. Some of it was just so ridiculous that I applauded, bringing that to the forefront. So maybe something along those lines would work for this purpose.
Yeah. I mean, definitely we have a lot of work to do in calling out funders. 'Cause I think that being nice has not worked, and now everything is very dire,
Mm-hmm.
right? And funders are still very reluctant. It's still very their response to everything that's been going on right now has been very tepid. And they send out statements of support or whatever, like we support the people of Minnesota. Okay, well, how about you give
What
up
does
more
that really mean?
money?
Right?
Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
give up more money then, because we don't
Yeah.
need any
Not
more
not just
statements.
more money this year, but how about a 20-year?
Yes, a 20-year grant, like conservative
Exactly.
funders. That is a great
Exactly.
idea. Yeah, if our democracy even lasts the next 20 years at this rate.
Or, I mean, not or, but and put in some money for advocacy, getting consortiums and collaborations of organizations together funded by philanthropy that you're right, they're stockpiling their money for a rainy day in the middle of a monsoon. I think that's a perfect way to put it. Okay, so we've talked a lot of doom and gloom, and maybe it's just where we are at the moment, but there's got to be some kind of hope. What gives you hope even when things are feeling bleak in the sector? There's got to be something.
Oh, there's plenty. I know there's like really great movements, like the community-centric fundraising movement for sure. Trust-based philanthropy is another movement to get funders to do things
Yes.
differently. But I think it's like individuals and organizations that are out there doing things like amazing things all the time. When SNAP was cut, all these organizations stepped in. And then individuals stepped in. I was just walking home one day and I just saw a woman was just like giving out free food from the trunk of her car. I was like, "Are you with an organization?" She's like, "No, I just decided to give money
To do
because
the
my
right
neighbors
thing.
were." Yeah, so that's it. And we see this in Minneapolis. We see this in Minnesota of neighbors supporting one another, businesses providing support and doing all sorts of really cool things. Also, like there is a lot of doom and gloom. And at the same time, there's amazing stuff happening globally as well. Like I think about Namibia being like basically all women run now, like their president, vice president, speaker of the assembly. I think 60% of their lawmakers are all women. I think about Burkina Faso, which has built this like giant green wall of trees to push back desertification, and it's been working. There's a group that's cleaning up the giant Pacific garbage patch in the ocean.
Yes.
And
And they're making a real impact.
they're making a real impact. The ozone layer is closing, like the whole ozone layer is closing. Um, there's tons of that. Of course, there's been a lot of like really cool people getting elected, and they have been unapologetically, supportive of very progressive values. And so there is lots of reason for hope. And fascism wants us to feel hopeless because when we feel hopeless, we don't build community. And so I've been feeling a lot more hopeful lately.
Good, good. So, with that in mind, what's one last piece of advice you could share with our listeners about how they can make a change, how nonprofit leaders, nonprofit organizations, funders can really have the most impact in making a change?
Yeah, I would say right now, a couple things. One is everything is made up, right? And now is a really good time to realize that and just to try to do things differently. We've been beholden to a lot of traditions that have not served us very well. And we think that these are like best practices. We think about, I don't know, like Robert's rules. Like, why are we still using Robert's rules? Like, who's
Yes.
Robert? Why are we still
Yeah.
using his rules?
That
He
old
was like
guy.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like this dude, an
Hmm.
army, U.S. Army officer who, like in 1878, compiled the U.S. Congress parliamentary procedures into this book, and then we've been using that for like literally 150 years now. But why do we
Right.
need to do that? There's no law that requires us to do that. Right? There's no law that says you only have one CEO. You can have you can have
Hmm.
co-directors. There's no law that says you have to make everyone work 5 days a week. No,
Right.
people are starting to think about like 4-day work weeks now. So
Right.
there's all sorts of really cool things that we should start doing. I mean, AI is really, really scary, and it's something we definitely need to be aware of because there's a lot of awful things going on with artificial intelligence. Um, but maybe there's a way we can actually use AI in a way that is ethical and freeing up people to actually be able to rest more, and create
Right.
more art and stuff. I mean, right now it's ridiculous that AI is being used to create art when it really should be
Yeah.
doing the boring stuff so that humans can be
This can
creating
get
art.
back to create art. Yeah. So, I
Yeah.
mean, you're really saying, and I agree with you, question every assumption, whether it seems like it's baked in, and sometimes it is. I mean, as a lawyer, some things are baked in, but not everything. And you mentioned a perfect example of generative governance. You don't need just, I mean, I think I might have even mentioned it in my book. You mentioned the one possibility of, okay, so have this one little group that has to do everything that's legal, right? And they check the box and they review the 990 and they do their meeting minutes and they do everything that is absolutely required under statute. But then you have a really robust, active, engaged group to do the real work of a nonprofit. And I loved that.
Yeah, yeah. It's called the minimally viable board,
Hmm.
and maybe it's combined with like a community board. And it was a model that works really well that I've been seeing in some places. And of course, we need to be okay with failure. If we're
Yeah.
gonna experiment, like not everything will work, but we've
And that's
entrenched a lot of,
okay.
yeah, that's okay. We've entrenched a lot of fear into our sector, and we need to get out of that and to have this like restore our imagination and the audacity of like ambition. In the book, in my book, I talk about Juicero, which was a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. It was seven
A
hundred
Wi-Fi
dollars.
what?
A Wi-Fi
Juicing?
connected juicing machine. It was a few
Okay.
years ago. It was $700, and you had to subscribe to these proprietary packets of cut up fruit and vegetables. And you place a packet into this machine, and it squeezes out one glass of juice for like $7 a packet. Bloomberg Media did an investigation and found out that you can just squeeze the packets by hand and get almost the same amount of juice, but faster. So they wrote about this in Juicero Tanked. But before it did, it was boasting that it had like over $125 million in venture capital.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was boasting that it had like 50 full-time engineers working on this Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. In the meanwhile, nonprofits are like, can we please get $12 to fight fascism and poverty and racism? You know? And the funder's like, we'll give you $1, but you can't
For
spend it
one
on
year.
overhead. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
For
Definitely
one
not
year.
overhead. Yeah, not anyone's salaries, just program. Like, what does that even mean? Who's supposed to do the work? We can't get a juicero to go out and do the work of nonprofits. Wouldn't that be great if you could? But we can't.
Exactly. So yeah, be ambitious. Add a 0 or 2 to your budgets.
And 48 months to the timeline, at least.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Vu, so much for being on the Nonprofit Counsel podcast. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much, May.
Okay, till next time.
Thank you for listening to the Nonprofit Counsel podcast. Are you ready to lead with clarity and confidence? Head to nonprofitcounsel.com to find the tools you need to start smart, lead strong, and create lasting impact.